Modern has always been a format that's had a lot of problems. In fact, I kind of think that that's been one of the selling points, at least to me, is that Modern is a format where players can come to feel very hot and cold. There are decks that players really, really love, certain cards, certain playstyles, certain matchups that are just so unique from everything else when it comes to Magic the Gathering and games in general. And then there's also decks that you just kind of love to hate. Crazy big mana decks, weird combos, way too efficient interactive cards. Like you could really feel all of the extremes of what it's like to be very enfranchised and enchanted by a game. But lately, and really since the release of Modern Horizons 3, it's been a lot more lukewarm, unfortunately. For the last 6 months that Modern Horizons 3 has been legal, the format has been dominated by unbalanced cards from that set. We had a very unpleasant Nadu summer. The card and the deck built around it dominated the Pro Tour, was the most competitive deck in the format for a long period of time, and Wizards took way too long to ban the damn thing. Those months leading up to the Nadu ban were a very difficult time to be a Modern player. Modern Horizons 3 was, I think, the most anticipated, hyped up set of all time. I think you could make a very good argument that that was the case. We had a lot of players who did play Modern already every day who were super excited. That was me. We had a lot of players trying the format for the first time. We had a lot of players coming back for the first time in a long time. It was really exciting. But when it was clear that Nadu was just dominating the format much better than everything else, completely unbalanced, there was like a big sense of like anxiousness from these players who wanted to play with the new cards and wanted to play the format, but the format was just kind of unplayable. And we had to wait months for the scheduled BNR announcement to get to play with the dang cards. And when that announcement came out, I made a longer video talking about how these scheduled BNRs are really bad for the health of the format. I'm going to link that video down below. I think there's a lot relevant there that I'm not going to get to today that is still relevant today, but I did want to play a clip from that video, which I feel is super important for today's discussion. And that pressure comes from the fact that if Wizards doesn't perfectly fix a format with a scheduled BNR announcement, the next chance they have to fix it is months and months away. I think the next scheduled BNR they've said is now in December. And that means that if the One Ring or Ruby Storm or Ugin's Labyrinth decks or whatever ends up being super duper prominent, dominant, and modern, and things are unfun, then we have months before Wizards is going to do anything about it. And here we are, 3 months later. The format has been pretty bad this entire time. It's kind of just devolved into a Boros synergy versus combo metagame. It's been like this for a while, and we have had to wait months for anything to happen. So it's time to get into the weeds a little bit, talk about what is the modern metagame like, what are the problems, and what are the solutions. And of course, I really, really want Modern to get back on track. I want it to be fun and exciting again. It is still my favorite format to play. I love to dive in deep. I love to get really weird with it. There's just nothing like it. It's such a unique and special format to me, and I have high hopes that we can fix the damn thing. But before I get into the specifics of what I'd like to see banned, what I might like to see unbanned, I want y'all to hear this. I think the most important thing that Wizards of the Coast can do during the December 16th scheduled BNR announcement is to get rid of scheduled BNR announcements. To just simply fix formats when they need to be fixed and leave them alone when they can be left alone. I understand that there are positives to the scheduled announcements, but in my opinion, Modern is just too volatile a format to have these scheduled announcements and keep an active and excited player base. Because things were relatively stable in the Modern format from like Strixhaven to Outlaws of Thunder Junction, with a few exceptions like Up the Beanstalk and Grief/Fury Scam, I think people kind of have forgotten that a big part of this format's history is just a new broken card being released like literally every set. I think from like War of the Spark to Kaldheim, there was either a card that got another card banned, a card that got a rule changed, or a card that outright got banned itself. And bans are bad. It stinks when stuff gets broken in Modern, but Modern is also an incredibly deep and complex and weird format. And unfortunately, stuff is just going to break sometimes, which again is why I think you just need to have a more proactive approach to the ban list. But I'll try not to harp on that point too much as we dive into the specifics. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The One Ring is problematic in Modern. It's a very powerful colorless card draw spell. It can go in every deck, and boy, does it go in a lot of decks. Now, if you remember around the time Nadu was legal, there was a lot of conversation about banning the One Ring. And I said, it's possible that you could need to ban the One Ring, but the problem I had with it was that the One Ring decks were very good against Boros energy. It was a pretty common thing where you could just play your rings for a couple turns, go over the top of the Boros energy decks. Now, since that was the metagame dynamic, Boros energy has just started playing the ring themselves. They do this so that they can beat those control decks that were playing the ring against them, and so that they can just beat the mirror. And they're going to side them out against a lot of the combo decks, but the card quality of Boros is so high that they can just afford to play the card. And I think for me, as soon as this became the metagame dynamic, you remember at the Pro Tour when Nadu was legal, Boros did not play the ring decks, very good against Boros. They've since adopted it. For me, this was the threshold where I felt that the ring needed to be banned. And I think we have a clear picture also that the One Ring is just a more powerful card in the modern format than it was before Modern Horizons 3 came out. I don't really see a lot of people talk about this, but I think Ugin's Labyrinth, Flage, both make the One Ring much stronger than it used to be, and the fact that Orcish Bowmaster is just not nearly as common as it used to be have just made ring stocks go way, way up. Ugin's Labyrinth, especially in combination with Talisman, lets you just cast the One Ring on turn 2 pretty dang often, and Flage is just such a perfect, powerful, resilient life gain win condition that you can play in your ring control decks, and you can play in your ring mid-range decks energy. And Orcish Bowmaster used to be a 4 of in 2 tier 1 decks, Yawgmoth and Rakdos Scam, 2 decks that have since kind of evaporated from the metagame. These things combined, the One Ring is just a really different animal than it used to be. I think to a lesser extent too, when they banned Violent Outburst, kind of the premier Force of Negation decks, Rhinos and Living End started to evaporate a little bit from the metagame, and so less Force of Negations means your non-creature 4-mana spells get better also. So we've talked about the elephant in the room. It's time to talk about the elk in the room. I do think a lot of modern players aren't really ready to have this conversation, but Jegantha the Wellspring is a very broken card. It is the 3rd most commonly played card in the modern format, and it also got a really weird and kind of quiet buff in Arena of Glory. Your 8-mana 5/5 has now been errated to be an 8-mana 5/5 with haste, and that is a really, really big deal on the card. Now, of course, Jegantha is not broken in the way that Lurrus was broken or Yorion was broken. Because those are really powerful card advantage spells that you get for free if you jump through your deck building requirement. Jegantha is broken because there is no deck building requirement a lot of the time. I do a lot of brewing in the modern format, and every single time I make a new deck, I just do a Jegantha check. Did the deck I build have any double mana symbols? And it's about 20-30% of the time they just don't, and I get a free 5/5. I think that this pill is pretty easy to swallow, that companions are pretty broken. Giving players an extra card is very silly. It breaks the game in a big way. Lurrus and Yorion were really, really awful. Now, and a lot of times when I have this conversation, people say, oh, okay, let's just ban all companions. And I think that this is kind of missing the point. At the very least, the ones that are still legal besides Jegantha, Lutri, Umori, Gyruda, Zerda, they're just kind of unplayable, and they do have pretty strict deck building restrictions, and I wouldn't ban them. I would ban Jegantha. Jegantha is broken because it does not really have a deck building restriction. Decks like Boros Energy, Domain Zoo, etc. just get to play the card for free. It should go. It is very, very bad to win the game with a Jegantha or lose the game to Jegantha, which I have done probably over 100 times at this point since the card has been legal. It is time for the card to go, in my opinion. I usually get a lot of pushback when I say this, but I feel very confidently that it is time for the elk to retire. So with these things in mind, I think that Wizards of the Coast, this is Wizards of the Coast here, have 2 paths that they could take. Path 1, you could ban Jegantha. Path 1, ban One Ring and Jegantha. Obviously, banning Jegantha is not as important as banning the One Ring, but I think both should go. In my mind, these are the 2 cards that would really improve gameplay and overall quality if they left the format. Now, Wizards could do this, and they could also say, we are also getting rid of all scheduled ban and restricted announcements going forward. We think that this has been not a good way to manage the format, and going forward, we are going to be keeping a close eye on Boros Energy. We're going to be monitoring the deck closely, and there's a chance that we will ban something from that deck in the coming weeks. I also think it would be a really good idea to unban some cool classic iconic cards too. Now, you don't have to unban these 3 cards specifically, or even 3 cards in general, but I would like to see Splinter Twin, Umezawa's Jitte, and Birthing Pod unbanned. I think that all 3 of these cards are very exciting. I think that all of these cards speak to different style of players, creature combo players, players who really like creature combat, and like combo control players. I also think all 3 of these cards would be fringe playable at best, which I know might be a dynamic and polarizing thing to say. I feel very confidently in this. Splinter Twin is a card that not only is there so much insane premium interaction for it that was not legal when Splinter Twin was around in the format. Fatal Push, Solitude, Beseiju, Force of Vigor, Force of Negation. The list really goes on and on and on. Not only is that the case, the format has just gotten a lot faster and more efficient in general, and I think Splinter Twin would be just a relatively clunky combo in the modern format in 2024. Umezawa's Jitte does one thing really well in a format that does not care about that thing. Umezawa's Jitte is a card that makes creature combat really one-sided, but I also think that the format has gotten much more powerful, much more efficient, and Umezawa's Jitte would not see any play in Boros Energy. This is an argument that I get a lot. Wouldn't Umezawa's Jitte make energy better? I think no. I think it would be suboptimal to play any number of Umezawa's Jitte over any number of Goblin Bombardment in Boros Energy. I think that Jitte would be a one-of in Stoneforge Mystic Brews. And I think making Stoneforge Mystic Brews better is fun and exciting. I think that those are decks that people really gravitate to and they like. I think it's good for those decks to kind of feel kind of classic and iconic. You get to get Jitte, get to get Kaldra. I think it's just kind of cool. I'll also say that these kinds of cards, like Jitte, when they've kind of had poor play patterns in the past, I think Twin is another example of this. Poor play patterns in the past, people are worried about unbanning them for fun reasons. I think you could have made the same argument, though, for Bloodbraid Elf, for Jace the Mind Sculptor, for Stoneforge Mystic itself, for Ancestral Visions, for Bitter Blossom. But in my opinion, when cards get kind of power leveled out of the format, like Twin, Jitte, and Pod, then they become fun. Like cards that are not powerful enough to dominate a format do not create unpleasant play patterns, in my opinion. And I think Birthing Pod would be a suboptimal way to build the Yawgmoth deck, which would be the best deck for Birthing Pod in general. I think Birthing Pod is worse than Birthing Ritual. I think that it is a very life-intensive card. Gets hit by Artifact Hate. I actually playtested both Twin and Pod against Caleb D like 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and the card performed quite poorly. I think Pod is another one of these cool, classic, iconic cards that would be safe to unban. But also, I think when you unban cards, you should do so with a purpose. And for me, the purpose of unbanning these cards would to be get people excited about the format. These are cards that people love. People would be excited to try them out and play. I think it would be a good way to get some life and excitement back into Modern. Okay, so that's path 1 Wizards could take. Ban the One Ring, ban Jegantha, get rid of the scheduled BNRs, unban some cool iconic cards. I feel like this would be what I would like to see happen, and this is what I would do if I was in charge. Now, I do think that there is another path. If the CEO of Wizards of the Coast or some executive or even the play design team themselves have just decided to keep these scheduled BNRs, if they are just here to stay and they're not willing to change them, you do have to take different action here. You need to ban the One Ring. You need to ban Jegantha. I think this is something you should do no matter what. But you also need to ban something from Boros Energy. It is just too risky to have a 3-month Nadu period. Format is unplayable. 3 month of Boros versus combo. Format is very bad. Into is the format still just going to be Boros versus combo decks? It definitely could be, which is why getting rid of the scheduled BNR lets you keep an eye on it. But 3 more months, I don't know if I can do it. So if you were going to ban something from Boros, I think you could kind of just pick any 2 cards from Ajani, Static Prison, Flage, Amteraptor, and Guide of Souls. I wouldn't pick Ocelot Pride. I think these 5 cards are about the same in power level. I think you can make a really good argument for any 2 of them. Most people want to ban Guide of Souls. I kind of think Amped Raptor would be the first one I'd ban, and then maybe Guide behind it. Maybe my friend Young Dingo, who plays a lot of deck, thinks that Johnny would be the one to go. I think there's a lot of great arguments for Static Prison. It's just like the most efficient removal spell ever. It's just 1 mana, exile anything. I think Flage being so resilient, especially compared with Arena of Glory, has a pretty good argument too. But I would ban 2 of them. I would just be very, very safe, very much nerf the deck. So, and I would also say that unbanning cards proactively like this is also a lot more difficult if you have these scheduled BNRs. I don't think it would be a mistake to unban any of these, but you just have to play it very, very safe with your unbans if you have scheduled announcements. So I probably wouldn't unban anything if I was going to take this route here. So these are the 2 things, the 2 routes that I think would make a lot of sense for Wizards to do. Now, Wizards of the Coast does not always do things that make sense. As Andrea Mengucci once wisely said, Wizards of the Coast mostly does things at random. In fact, I kind of feel very likely that Wizards will not take one of these 2 paths. I think that there's a good chance that something else happens. It's possible that there's some big executive pressure for them to not ban the One Ring because it's such a iconic card. It's possible that they won't want to ban 2 things from Modern Horizons 3 because this is such an anticipated set. I don't think that those arguments make any sense, and I think that they're like weird corporate arguments that I don't like to make them for Wizards. If Wizards is going to do weird corporate things, I'm not going to try to do mental gymnastics to justify it. I'm just going to talk about what I think would make sense to happen. This is what I think would make sense to happen. This is what I hope happens. If Wizards messes it up, I will probably continue playing Standard for a while. Let me know what you think. Obviously, very divisive, very polarizing. People have a lot of opinions on this. I feel like I did the best presenting my arguments as best as I can. We'll see what happens next Monday. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.